We are walking through the book of Revelation. Good times, right? Are we in the end times? Well, the answer is yes, because we've been in the end times for like 2,000 years, but according to Scripture. But um, when I first came to the church, this is the background here, in pretty much everywhere it seems. The most requested like series and teaching people want to do is the book of Revelation. Now, for those of you who have been with me long enough, you realize I'm disappointing a lot of them because they're waiting for like the Hollywood movies and the novels I'm going to write about the end times and who's the Antichrist. And today we get to talk about the mark of the beast. That's a really fun one. Can't wait. And then I greatly disappoint them because I think a lot of the stuff that's been written about Revelation in the recent years is very misguided. And what I try to do with this book and what I think is great about the Bible is we want to know, what did this say to the first people that listened to this? And when we start to unlock that stuff, you've seen this as we walk through, you see the truths that pop out that say, oh, you mean that wasn't just a problem for Bible times and I can't relate to this book? No, you can definitely relate to this book. So we've talked about all sorts of things, but you're not going to hear any predictions or what year I think Jesus is coming back or anything like that. But what you will hear is what this book's about, which is basically a question that John poses to his listeners who are under persecution from the Roman Empire. Are you going to bow to empire, or are you going to bow to the Lamb? And that's a question that's always there, which will get asked again today as you hear this. But as we walk through the mark of the beast, that's where we're going. And so if you have a Bible, or even if you have a device, Revelation chapter 13 is where we're going to be. We'll have it on the screen as well. I'm going to read the whole chapter here, and then we're going to pray and kind of dive into it. And hopefully you can hang with me today. Revelation chapter 13, I'm going to read out of the ESV. That's what's also going to be on the screen. Feel free to follow along whatever translation that you have. And John records, I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed. And the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like this beast, and who can fight against it? And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them, and authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation. And all who dwell on earth will worship it, everyone whose name was not written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword must he be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. And then I saw another beast rising out of the earth, and it had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image of the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. And this calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Let's pray together. God, I ask in this moment, as we sift through the many details of what you've revealed in Scripture here, that my words would be your words. Lord, that your Holy Spirit would illumine each person's heart to the truth that you want to speak to them today. And God, we know that you are so big and powerful that you can speak to everyone in a unique way, and you could speak to them in ways that have nothing to do with what I'm going to say right now. And so, God, I just pray that you would move in that way and clear all the stuff that's in the way, whether it's our anxieties or what we have to think about for the rest of the day, to hear a fresh word today. In the name of Jesus, and everybody said, amen. So just a reminder, if you've been with us long enough, and if you're new, Revelation is a book that quotes the Hebrew Bible more than any other, what people call the Old Testament, more than any other book, by a long shot. And for those of you who've been here long enough, and if you, there's a ton of, I don't know what message this is in the series, like 16th. We started even last summer, and kind of paused, came back this summer to continue, but you can look up the series and feel free to listen to any of those, but you know that there's a lot of stuff quoted from the prophets, especially here. This is no different when you mention the beast. So when a Jewish listener hears the word beast, because John's, he's writing, you got to remember, John is not writing to the world. He's writing to 7 churches in what is now known as Turkey, Asia Minor region. He's writing to 7 churches. And when these Jewish listeners hear the word beast, for a Jewish listener, the first thing from the prophets that's going to come up is Daniel. And Daniel chapter 7 specifically talks about 4 beasts. And I've listed them for you in chapter 7. They're very specific beasts. There's 4 of them. The first one is a lion that has eagle's wings. And just that alone, a lion and an eagle are animals that are considered symbolically dominant, right? And if you notice as we go through these beasts in Daniel, they're all like predators, people who pounce and dominate other things. And many times, and even with the next one, a bear is the second beast that you see in Daniel 7. Those 3 animals, if you think about the history of the world, there's a lot of nations, dominant nations and empires, that usually have one of those 3 as their symbol. In fact, our own country has one of those symbols even now, right? The eagle, right? Which, by the way, was the symbol of the Roman Empire. Everyone knew the Roman eagle. And so there you got a beast right now, a lion with eagle's wings, which wasn't talking about Rome in Daniel chapter 7. It was talking about Babylon, which is where the book was written under at the time. There's a bear, there's a leopard with 4 heads, and then there's a beast that's so terrifying. It's like more terrifying than all of them, that had iron teeth and 10 horns. And each of these 4 beasts represented 4 kingdoms. And there's lots of debate from people over the years of what they're predicting these kingdoms to be. Again, they're trying to fill in the blanks with all these things, and who knows? I mean, Babylon was very real to them with the lions and eagle's wings. The Persian Empire conquered them with Alexander the Great, which was very well known for another kingdom. And then there's the Greeks, and then the Romans conquered the Greeks. Now, so could those be the 4 kingdoms? Very possible. But again, Daniel, just much like Revelation, is apocalyptic literature, and I can't say it enough. When we read apocalyptic literature, we have to remember symbols, 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 symbols. You never want to equate something by quantifying something with something else. Like, so-and-so is the Antichrist. So this so-and-so. You got to be really careful about that. It doesn't mean it can't happen. It just means you got to be careful when you go there. But this was the dominant theme in a Jewish person's mind because they're always under oppression. And these kingdoms are under, and there's the promises of this. That's why they believe so much in this political Messiah. The Messiah that, remember during Jesus' time, we talked about this. Jesus is actually a political Messiah. He's going to kind of kick the Romans out, kick butt and take names, kick the Romans out. That's what they were hoping for. That's not what they got in Jesus. That's what the disciples even wanted, some of the disciples, which is, I think, one of the biggest reasons Judas betrayed Jesus, because he didn't turn out to be the political Messiah that he wanted as a zealot. And there you go. Well, that's not what happened, and we've learned in Revelation that the picture of the Messiah is much different as well. It's not a lion; it's a lion's roar. But when John saw it, remember what he saw? A lamb who was slain. Right. So John hears one thing, he sees another. It happens a lot in the book. So you got these kingdoms in chapter 7 of Daniel. Now you bring it to Revelation 13 in the description that John gives, and it's like the 4 beasts became like a transformer that combines all together or something. Like, it just gets all the parts together. It's one beast, but it has all 4 of these characteristics in Daniel 7, specifically to a Jewish listener. Like, wait a minute, you're talking about beast 1, beast 2, beast 3, and beast 4 all together in one. Yeah, that's bad, right? So you kind of get the image of what's happening. This is like John is painting the picture in the vision of this is like the ultimate of the anti-kingdom against Christ. And so that's really important to understand, because this is like all the beasts combined. And for them, and again, we've argued this before, whether you think this book was written at the time of Nero in the 50s and 60s, or as I argue, in the time of Domitian, which is the late or mid 90s, 95 of the Caesar that was ruling. It doesn't matter. Either way, the people who are listening, when they hear about the beast and what the experience of it is, there's no doubt that you can make a connection to Rome. Rome is doing all of these things that's being described. It's not like it's hard, but remember, Revelation's like a cipher. It's symbolic, but it's also cryptic to the Romans' ears. So that's why it pulls a lot from the Hebrew Bible. The Romans don't know the Hebrew Bible. So they can put all these symbols in here to speak a message without getting persecuted, without getting killed for this literature. Because if there's censors in Rome who are looking for this literature. They will burn the books, they will crucify the people that write them, or read them, or promote them. Revelation's a cipher. And so you hear all this stuff. There's no doubt these people are thinking about Rome in this. Now, I don't want you to get too carried away with that, though, because, again, apocalyptic literature is symbols. Rome is very real to them, so it's real. But then you got to think about the time it's happening. So it's going to be a little bit of history, but I'll come back around because we got to get to the mark of the beast, which is, I mean, I think you're going to have fun when I talk to you about what they're experiencing about the mark. But Domitian was one of the most ruthless Caesars that there was. I've told you about him before. He was the first Caesar to declare war on Jesus. So there was a declaration of war by this Caesar against Christians. And so hearing what John says is no surprise when he's talking through chapter 13. And he was, Domitian was pretty aggressive in letting you know who God was in the flesh, which was him. Caesar and the emperors, and Domitian was one of the worst, always wanted to lift himself up as God. It was Augustus, who was then the Caesar at the time that Jesus was born, the first one that declared himself to be the Son of God. But what's interesting is that, back then, they don't have the internet, right? We have the internet, we got our phones, there's all sorts of ways to find out, like, to promote propaganda and what have you. Well, the Romans didn't have that, obviously, because it's ancient times, but they had other ways. Architecture, currency, rituals, parades, games, you name it. Everything in Rome, even what you wore and where you sat at tables, all promoted the empire. And it also promoted the emperor as the son of God. Let me show you an example. There's some coins. I think I have it on. There's a coin. It's one of the coins that Domitian had made. This is a picture of Domitian on the left. And in the inscription, it says that Domitian, the son of God, all right? And on the other side of the coin, on the right, you see that there's a statue, and that's a statue of Jupiter, one of their gods. Jupiter was the equivalent in the Roman god to Zeus of the Greeks. Remember Zeus? He was like the king of the gods in the Greeks. So you can't really see it in person here. On the screen, you'll see it better because it's a little more vivid, but Jupiter's holding a lightning bolt in his right hand. And a lightning bolt was a symbol of like ultimate authority, domination, and I am the ruler supreme. That's Domitian. He minted coins that had that. He also had other coins. That wasn't the only thing. Here's another one. This was same thing on the same side. Domitian, that's a picture of him. He's even wearing the aegis, which is another symbol of authority and power, talking about who he is, and on the front, Son of God. And then the other side, there's an altar, which this is a picture of the altar of the imperial temple. So there's temples. If you remember way back last summer, we talked about the 7 churches, that all the cities built a temple to the emperor. And there was like a competition between them all, who could build the biggest and most grandest temple to the emperor. But people would go to this temple and make sacrifices to worship the emperor. It was kind of demanded. That's an example of the temple to worship of the emperor. That is the money in Rome. Now, if you look at currency today around the world, there's all sorts of symbols like this that promote an image, some type of message. In this one, hey, the emperor is the Son of God. He is God in the flesh. He is divine, and you must worship him. It's plastered all over their architecture. And as a person who's following Jesus in the first century, there's no doubt that you see it, and I've already told you about some of the entertainment purposes Domitian had for Christians, which is like he loved his games. He was a big sports guy. He loved his gladiator games. He loved his chariot races. That's where we got the 4 horsemen, right? The 4 different colored horses. That was a big grand, celebration that he had. Well, he would, have an entertainment time where he'd throw the Christians to the lions in the gladiator games, just for sport. And that was the way of getting rid of them when they were traitors to the empire. And remember, the Christians were called atheists because they believed in one God. I mean, how could you do that? You're not really a person who's religious. This is the background of what these Christians are facing. Their propaganda is all over the place, demanding that you worship the emperor as God. You can understand how that is a problem for Christians, right? And this whole book has already begun. I mean, we went through half this book already, and you already see how it's pitted all the time. Are you going to worship the empire or the lamb? Now, Rome is very vivid in the mind of the first listeners, but it's not just about Rome, is it? It's about empire. What are the characteristics of empire? What does it do? In this chapter, it's very vivid. If the empire demands you to bow and worship it, then John in chapter 13 says you must resist. And by the way, the consequence for that is not pretty. You're going to get captured and tortured and killed. And that's not a new message. We've already talked about that in previous chapters. So, that's really fun. And then he goes on, he talks about a second beast, because that's not just the first beast, there's a second beast, right? And for those who are listening, they know this person well. And they talk about this beast that's has two horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercised all authority of the first beast. And then it's performing all these great signs and making fire come down from heaven. And it's talking about all this stuff. Now, for the first listeners, this is not a mystery to them, because in the imperial temple, the temple of the emperor, there were high priests, just like the Jewish people had high priests. They had high priests as well in their temple. But the thing is about the high priest of then, as different with someone like me, for example, let's just use that equivalent for now. Like, the high priest at the imperial temple was not just like, say, a pastor of that church, per se. If we're going to use that language so you can understand, right? They also were like the main political influence of that region for the empire. It's almost like the high priest would be like the leading politician, like the mayor, in a sense, of the city or the town. It's really in cities where these temples are. But that's how he spoke. He was like the main propaganda promoter. He was the main chief marketer, the high priest. And he would demand, the empire would demand people to worship the emperor at this temple. And I've talked about this briefly before, but I'm really going to dive into it today because it gets to this mark that we're talking about at the end. Now, there is a ceremony that was very popular back then in the imperial temple. And you'll love this title, what it was called. The historians call it the Good Friday Gospel of the Mortal Wound. That was the ceremony that the high priest would do at the imperial temple, the Good Friday service of the immortal wound. Because what was interesting, what happened with messiahs, and this will seem very interesting to you, is that this messiah, which would be the emperor in this case, would undergo some type of deep trial or even almost death or even death, and somehow would be rescued from death or rise from the dead from a mortal wound to become the Son of God. That sounds very familiar, doesn't it? This is the ceremony they practiced. Now, what happened was, have any of you ever seen like those magic shows on TV before? Like they do those specials and stuff like that. I don't know if you ever, I don't know if it's still on, but years ago, I remember there was a magic show where this guy, I don't know who he is, he had a ski mask on or something to hide his identity, and he showed all the behind the scenes of how the magicians do their tricks. And I know magicians like hated this guy because like, well, you're showing them how we do all this stuff. This is how we make our living. And he's just like showing, like, this is how they do it. It's not really magic. It's like, and he's showing. Now, they're pretty amazing feats in itself regardless, right? But that's kind of what these high priests did. They were great magicians. And so what they would do at this ceremony, and especially and for John, he was basically the apostle of Ephesus. That's one of the cities that the Revelation addresses. Ephesus is a huge population of Jewish Christians. In the temple, at the imperial temple of Ephesus, was a gargantuan statue of Domitian. It's like 25, 30 feet high, just standing right in the center. And they would come to the statue, the high priest is here, and they would go through this ritual, this kind of ceremony, some of the language very familiar to the book of Revelation, reciting these kind of, even the beginning of Revelation is kind of the liturgy, the order is very similar to what the high priest would say to this statue. And people would come who had to, give worship to the emperor, and he would call down fire from the heavens. Now, the thing was, it really wasn't fire. It kind of feels similar to those who are familiar with the Hebrew Bible with Elijah, the prophet Elijah. You remember that story? That was a crazy story. When he went to showdown the 450 prophets of Baal, and they danced all around the altar, and they're trying to bring down fire. They can't do anything. And Elijah prays. He dumps water in the altar. I think it's like he's like me. He's like taunting people, like, yeah, let's see that. I'm gonna dump water on it just to prove that this is pretty epic. prays, and the fire just consumes both the altars, right? You remember that story? That's what that story was. Crazy story. So this very similar in tone, right, with this high priest at the imperial temple in Ephesus, but he would arrange fire to come down. So fire would literally like rain down on the statue in front, and people would be like, "Oh, wow!" Like there's a miracle, right? Because God is speaking. The emperor, the emperor is divine. But there's some people in the crowd are like, "I see what he's doing there. Yeah, that's not real." No, I know what you're doing. Well, the high priest in Rome had a very simple solution for that when they saw people do that. Because what would happen is they would ask people to worship the emperor, and there was a way that they did that. And that was the high priest had a circlet on his head that had a symbol in the middle, the symbol of the emperor as the Son of God. He also had a signet ring. And what you would do to display your fealty to the emperor, display your allegiance to the emperor, is that you would come and receive the mark of the emperor on your forehead or your wrist to signify you being in allegiance with the emperor. And if you decide not to do that, if you're looking at this like, this isn't real, I'm not going to take it, the simple solution was this: they kill you. Or they do everything they can to outcast you from society. In fact, in some of these cities, if you did not take the mark of the emperor, you could not buy or sell in the marketplace. If you had a business and you did not take the mark of the emperor, they wouldn't let you. That was your admission ticket to the marketplace, to the agora, as they call it. That's the agora, the marketplace. You couldn't buy or sell in the marketplace if you did not take the mark of the emperor. By the way, you know what historians called Domitian as one of his popular nicknames? The Beast. So they would say back then, did you take the mark of the beast? If you took the mark of the beast, you could buy or sell in the marketplace. If you took the mark of the beast, you would be socially accepted into certain guilds. If you took the mark of the beast, you would not be outcast from the society. If you took the mark of the beast, you wouldn't be executed. So when John says this in chapter 13, for the people that are listening, this isn't any mystery. It's real. They know exactly what this feels like. And it's amazing to me how we've taken this in a whole nother direction, right? I've even heard all sorts, you hear all the conspiracy theories about you take the mark of the beast and this might have the mark of the beast in it, or maybe you actually took the mark of the beast, or I heard about the microchip thing all the time, right? Put the microchip in your wrist or your hand, or you put it on your forehead, and then you can buy or sell. It's like, the credit card thing. It's like, but by the way, you do know we already carry a chip around in our cards. You see the chip in the card? I just think it's kind of funny. It's like we already carry the chip, so if you're really into that theory, okay, anyway. I digress. But we try to figure out all that kind of stuff, and you got to remember Revelation symbolism, the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast is not about, it's the technology of being able to buy or sell. That's just a mark. It's a statement, though. The statement is, I have bowed to empire. I have bowed to the emperor. I am swearing allegiance to the empire instead of the Lamb. And when you talk about marks in Scripture, because there's other mentions of marks, Ezekiel mentions marks. There's people, actually the believers in chapter 9 in Ezekiel are marked. But all the marks are not physical. They're always spiritual. It's symbolism again. It's like your allegiance is to this person or that person or this movement. That's what the mark is. And so John's putting this down here. It's people are taking a mark, except those whose name are written in the Lamb's book of life, right? So that's the Lamb, the people of the Lamb who was slain. We've talked about that all throughout Revelation. So, you can imagine the people who are listening to this and the dilemma that they have, right? And then you hear that number 666 at the end. Everyone loves the 666, right? And you can watch all sorts of specials on this or YouTube videos if you want because it says at the last verse, let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast. For its number of a man and his number is 666. Who's the man? Now, there's lots of historians that try to figure out who this is, right? You can actually, a lot of times in the ancient world, they didn't really have numbers. They had letters. A letters equals number. They use their alphabet. And if you actually calculate 666, and there's all sorts of ways. There's actually a couple ways. There's a strong argument that this actually, the Emperor Nero, his name equals the number 666 if you met it out in Hebrew, not in Greek, which is odd. There's a whole argument about that. But you also can get Domitian's name from that as well, the number 666. So for like, okay, well, I know this is Nero. I know this is Domitian for the ancient listeners. Well, that's, again, symbolism, right? We've talked about the number 7. It's a lot in Revelation. It's a number of completion. 6 is considered unholy. That's what it means. When you say the number 6, it's unholy. Now you got 666. You've heard 777. We've got 7 times 4, right? You've heard all these numbers before. 6 is the unholy number. For example, in Daniel chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar builds a statue of himself. Really familiar story to those who are in the time of Domitian, because they know that feeling very well. Builds a statue of himself that measures 60 cubits by 6 cubits. I think it's 90 feet by 9 feet is the measurement for us. Which, if you actually try to build a statue like that and make it stand on its own, it's impossible. So what does that mean? Wait, because we're so into quantity. No. It's not about the physical dimensions. Again, we're doing our Western American thing. We're counting. We're using numbers. No, this is a symbol. This is a meaning. Nebuchadnezzar built a unholy 60 by, it's like multiplied, 60 by 6. So 6 times 10 times 6. It's like unholy. It's a big statue himself, which, by the way, he asked people to bow down and worship him. He actually played a song. It was like if we sang the doxology, and that was the song we used to bow to Nebuchadnezzar. That's what he did. And then you remember there was 3 guys that didn't bow in that story in chapter 3. You remember those names? Really interesting names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The music played. They didn't bow. They got thrown in a fiery furnace and didn't burn up. That's the same chapter when he built this statue. So it's an unholy number. So 666, it's like, this beast is unholy. We just want you to know that. This is the mark. And if you take the mark, you're swearing allegiance to the most unholy thing that is totally against the Lamb. And so John just poses the question. You're being a Christian in the first century, and I love how N.T. Wright puts it in his commentary, because this really brings it home with the questions that they're asking themselves. And we'll bring this to us, because you might be thinking of some of these situations now. N.T. Wright, one of my favorite New Testament scholars, he says this. He says, does it count as a compromise if I use Caesar's coinage, like I showed you with Domitian, right? Even though it has words like Son of God stamped on it? Is it a compromise if I put my stall out by the side of the road during one of the great imperial festivals, the imperial festival being the one in the temple, right, that worships the emperor, to catch the crowds as they're going to the temple, even if I don't go myself? Will it matter if I buy a slab of beef in the market, which, by the way, the only meat available in the market was that which was sacrificed to the gods of the Romans and the emperor? Will it matter if I buy a slab of beef in the market, even though I know it will have been offered in sacrifice in Caesar's temple just up the road? And then he says, for us, does it matter if we buy a newspaper which openly mocks the Christian faith? You can tell how old he is by saying this. Openly mocks the Christian faith and promotes every other way of life imaginable except the Christian one, even if all I'm going to read is the sports news? I just bought the paper because it has a great sports section, basically, right? Does it matter if I work for a company that through one of its other offshoots is cheerfully polluting lakes and rivers and destroying their wildlife? Should I be worried that my bank is a major investor in companies that work in parts of Latin America where labor laws are practically non-existent, allowing them to get away with virtual enslavement of local populations? He's relating some of those questions to the things that they're dealing with. It's the same type of questions. And it comes to a situation in chapter 13 that the Christians have to do, and that is to practice discernment. How far is too far in this case? If I have to just function, because, if you're a small business owner, think about this, and you don't take the mark of the emperor, you can't have a business unless you put it outside the temple. But they won't let you put it outside the temple. The Agora is like, hey, if you want to, well, you could. You're just not going to make any money, because all the money was to be made was in the marketplace at the Agora where all the booths were. You put it on the side of the road, good luck. You might be able to feed your family. And they're wrestling with, if I do this, am I bowing to the emperor? What if I just do it just to avoid getting killed? And you hear John's answer in chapter 13 again, and it's over and over, and it's a hard call, right? He's telling them to resist. And here's the result. You're going to get killed. You're probably going to get captured and tortured, but we all know the result. Because you see the 42 months again in this text. You remember that 42 months? We talked about that before. 42 months is 3.5 years. 3.5 is half of 7. 7, the number of completion. 3.5 means the time is limited. This isn't going to be forever. We know that the dragon, who's Satan, we found out, Emmett talked about last week, is the dragon who's Satan, the great accuser. His time is limited. So is the beast. Their time is limited. And we'll talk more next week as we go into the 144,000 again, back to the bowls and the judgments, and talked about their marks and countings. But that's the thing they're dealing with. And maybe I don't know, have you been in a situation where you feel like you have to make a choice between worshiping Christ and worshiping empire? Like maybe, and I've seen this happen. I've people talking about this. Like they want to get a promotion, they're going to have to go the way of empire to get it, the way that is not the way of Jesus. And it seems like the culture is filled with that at the workplace. Like the only way I can get advancement is if I bow to the demands that is completely against what Jesus tells me to do. Or you're at school and you're pressured to fit into a particular group of people, but they ask you to basically do their bidding. That is not in the way that's helping anybody, and you know it. But you just want to be with someone and belong somewhere. You see where I'm getting at? We face these decisions all the time, whether to bow to empire or the beast. And we're going to get more specific because what's really easy, again, we're Westerners. We like to individualize everything. And I'm still trembling a little bit as I go forward through the book because it's going to get more bold with talking about social and political issues. Because the whole book of Revelation it's a political book. You know, and I think I put this up here. Did I put this up here, Matt, about political stuff? Yeah, I did. Let's just get real clear about this because we confuse American politics with politics. A political body is just a group of people who are organized under an authority. That's what a political body is. For the people of the Lamb, that authority is Jesus, right? For the Roman Empire, that authority is the emperor. But even today, we are organized in ways to submit under an authority that may not be Jesus in our day. And this whole entire book is organizing a group of people, a political body, to be a different type of people, which, by the way, is the call of this entire book. I mean, you do realize that. It's mobilizing a group of people to show what God looks like. That's a political body. It's making a political statement. You're defying the emperor. That's what these listeners are doing. Don't take the mark. That's treason. That's scary. We don't have to face that right now. There's some people that do. But there's everyday situations that we face where we have to make those decisions of who do we bow to. And I told you, come back again and again and again. And what's interesting to me, and with the dragon, it was evident last week, is that this book is so incessant that the blood of the Lamb is way more powerful than Satan. Isn't that crazy to think that? Because that's not the way it normally goes in our world. That's not how it works. The blood of the Lamb is more powerful than Satan. And it's up to the church to discern how empire can seduce us into worshiping it instead of God. That's the practice we have. And it's not easy. It's complicated. Just like N.T. Wright said of those questions, it's a lot more multi-layered than we like to believe. How do we feed our family and not, it's all these questions. It doesn't mean go be in a bubble. It's how do we engage with culture? We talked about this in one of the letters to the churches in chapter 2. How do we engage with culture? Do we just completely detach from it? No, that's not the answer. Do we just completely buy everything in the culture? That's not the answer either. There's a counterculture there that's kind of a mix of both in some ways. We're in the world and not of it, right? So we're engaged with culture, but we're not the same as the culture. There's a different kind of culture that God is creating in this book and has throughout the whole Bible, a culture of the people of the Lamb. And there's many pressures that we face in the church, and it's getting worse. I'm telling you, it's getting harder and harder as we, especially in this country, to to resist in ways that most of the culture isn't going to like. What does it look like to fight back? And a lot of fighting back usually looks like what the culture does to fight back, right? Use manipulation, use coercion, use power and dominance. And yet, the answer every time of Jesus in responding to the culture is guess what? This. The table. That's how Jesus fights back. Every time. That's why it's central to us. That's why he instituted it to his disciples. The table is the central place. He invites you to the bread and the cup. I don't know if you've ever been given an ultimatum to choose the way of Jesus or fit in with this way that's not his way. To be a friend group, to be part of a friend group, to even choose a particular political candidate, to avoid a consequence you don't deserve. How does Jesus fight back? He says, "This is my body broken for you. Every time you eat of this, you do this in remembrance of me." And we talked about this in the book before, right? That the saints, the people, the lamb are on the altar, right? You're supposed to give your blood, not take it. This is the same thing. I broke my body for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. And then he takes the cup of the new covenant. He said, "This is my blood of the new covenant given for you and many for the forgiveness of sins. Every time you drink of this, you do this in remembrance of me." Man, those first listeners know very much what blood spilling out looks like. The empire is doing it all over the place. In fact, that's what happens when you don't take the mark. And you're there. If you're there and you're participating in this and you don't take the mark, they're going to kill you. Or do something else to make your life torturous. For John, they exiled him. They exiled him to this island in Patmos, right? That's where he wrote this book. He was the main apostle of Ephesus. Take out the leader of an influential movement in a city that is against the empire, they're going to crumble. And we know that that's not what happened. It was the exact opposite effect, right? This is how they fought back, by the giving of their blood. Jesus says, "I gave my blood for you and for many, for the forgiveness of sins." Because the power of Jesus' blood is always more powerful than the dragon or the beast, every time. And he calls his people to be the same people. Follow my example. It's not just a truth of forgiveness for us and what Jesus took on, the worst humanity had. It's also an invitation. That's why it's central to us, the table. We accept it as a truth in our lives to say we don't deserve this and we need your forgiveness, and then we walk into that to be broken open and poured out for the world. That's how you fight back. You break yourself open, you pour yourself out for people. And our culture thinks that's whack. It doesn't work, but it does. You know it. You see it all around you. You've experienced this, and this is the call to the church. This is what John is saying to them. Don't take the mark because you know this is the way. And you know this is going to speak way louder than if you give in and go along with what the empire is telling you, to worship itself, to worship things that are not of Jesus. And you can have full confidence of that, friends, because the dragon, the beast, their time is limited. Their time is limited. I don't know how long that is for us sometimes, or you feel like it's never going to go away, but it's limited. And the invitation to us is, look, it's worth it. There will be a day, we've talked about this, there'll be vindication someday. The full restoration of heaven will come to earth, and they will merge into one. That's the end of the book. And you can celebrate in that then. And in the meantime, break yourself open and pour yourself out, and resist in ways that don't give in to the ways of empire, like the four horsemen do, like the dragon does, like the beasts do. You do it as Jesus does, as the lamb who was slain. And the lamb who was slain spoke with a lion's voice and looked like a lamb, but you know that roars loudly, doesn't it? You've seen this when you break yourself up and pour yourself out for someone. Doesn't always result in happy things all the time, but there's moments that it does. And it's compelling. And this is why we commit to this. This is why I want to eventually, if I ever get to this, I don't know if we ever will. I like do this every week to center ourselves. It's formational. That's why we call it a sacrament. It forms us. It actually shows us in this simple ritual, as we call it, how to live. What John is saying in chapter 13. So as we go to take these elements, for those who are new with us, obviously for those of you in person, you can see we have huge chunks of bread and juice, which means, you can stand up here and take it if you want. You just feel really awkward just standing around. So if you want to take it back to your seat, that's totally fine. And we put some of them in bags for those of you that are still trying to be cautious about that. We have some in bags. We also have gluten-free. We have some just regular pieces as well, big cups of juice. You can go back to your seat with that. If you're at home, you'll have your own elements as well. Hopefully, we'll do that in just a moment. But let's take just a minute, and if you just want to, before we take this, anybody's welcome at this table if they want to be people of the Lamb. There's no, we don't have scanners, right? We don't, okay, are you a Christian or not? We don't get into that stuff. Everybody's welcome at this table because this is the way of Jesus. And we invite people who confess Jesus as Lord to come to this table. We don't ask you questions on that. We're trusting that it's a sacrament for us as we're coming here. So let's pray together as we go into that. And I just ask just to take a minute of silent prayer for you. If you just want to get something off your chest to God, maybe you're thinking of a situation right now where you've had to choose between the ways of empire or the way of Jesus. And I just ask you to offer that to God or things that are getting in the way right now. And I'll pray in just a moment. God, I ask as we come to this table, I can't imagine what a mystery it was for so many at the beginning of instituting this and why. But God, for all these thousands of years and hundreds of years, God, it has been the sacrament that shapes us. And God, is the way we do relationships to understand that we don't deserve your grace and your love, and yet you took all the worst that humanity had to dish out because you loved us. Because there's a better way to live. And so God, I pray as we take these elements today, that not only will we take this in this being our mark, God, but God, that we would also live out in ways of resistance that is a compelling narrative for others of hope, to understand that there are ways of life that are destructive. And God, the solution is not to constantly make ourselves holier than thou or think we are. It's to humbly break ourselves open and pour ourselves out for others, to love in ways that are beyond comprehension, the way that you love us. And God, I pray that we would live into that. And God, we understand that may give us, get people to ridicule us. It may get us thrown out of groups. It may even prevent promotions at our jobs. God, I pray it would be a compelling narrative to lift you up as the one truly worthy of all worship. So God, as we take these elements, I pray also as it's an act of solidarity for us as well to encourage one another in this way of living, to understand that the way of Jesus is not only the best way to live, it is salvation, God. It is the flourishing life now, that starts now into the forever. We pray all this in the name of Jesus, and we said,